The Clothes Have No Emperor. Written and narrated by Ian Purdy. Copyright 2025. Appendix 1. God. Let's start with the really big one. According to Wikipedia, I quote, "In monotheistic belief systems, God is usually viewed as the supreme being, creator, and principal object of faith. In polytheistic belief systems, God is a spirit or being believed to have created or for controlling some part of the universe or life for which such a deity is often worshipped. Belief in the existence of at least one God is called theism." Unquote. BibleStudies.com defines the attributes of God. I quote, "God is infinite. He is self-existing, without origin. God is immutable. He never changes. God is self-sufficient. He has no needs. God is omnipotent. He is all-powerful." Unquote. Renowned biblical translator Mauro Biglino, in Part 3 of The Falling of the Gods, states, "When we speak of an omnipotent God, it is an erroneous translation." Unquote. He goes on to state in Part 6, I quote, "When you find God, read and insert Elohim instead, which is the term they have used. Then you will do a respectful reading of the Bible. These are the terms the Hebrew authors have used." Unquote. By his reference to the Hebrew authors, he is clearly talking about the Old Testament, and therefore not the words attributed to Yeshua in the New Testament. He goes on to explain that the word Elohim is a plural and refers to some type of human beings. The singular form is Eloah. Mauro Biglino was an official translator for the Vatican. He speaks Hebrew, Greek, Italian, and English, and successfully translated over 70 books for the Vatican, which were published by the St. Paul Press in Rome. However, when they asked him to substitute the word God for the word Elohim in his translations, and he refused, he was fired immediately. In a podcast, Gods of the Bible with Paul Wallace, Mauro Biglino makes the following statement, I quote, "I don't say that God does not exist. I don't know about God. I don't speak about God. I only say that in that book, the Bible, there is no spiritual God. There are the Elohim." Unquote. In the same podcast, Paul Wallace, author of the Eden Conspiracy, describes the Elohim as, I quote, "a secret society that controls vast knowledge." Unquote. Graham Hancock, author of Fingerprints of the Gods, describes the Elohim as the powerful ones. So who or what are the Elohim who the Catholics insist must be translated to mean God? Where did they come from? The Christian answer is that every member of the spiritual world is an Elohim. This includes angels, archangels, and presumably demons. It's unclear whether Santa Claus's reindeer are also considered Elohim. Another theory is that they were the survivors from the lost civilizations of Atlantis, Mu, and Lemuria, who possessed advanced knowledge and technology and who shared these with more primitive peoples, thereby aiding their evolution towards modern civilization. It has also been suggested that the Elohim were extraterrestrial aliens who were referred to as the Anunnaki in the Sumerian tablets. The term Elohim was not originally Hebrew, but was derived from the Sumerian language, lending added credence to the theory that they were at least somehow associated with the Anunnaki. Legends exist in many ancient cultures from India, China, Africa, Australia, and the Americas of helpers who arrived from the sky and provided advanced knowledge of subjects including agriculture, mathematics, architecture, astrology, and civics. The pre-Christian Jews had several names to describe specific members of the Elohim in their ancient scriptures, some of which are included in the Old Testament of the Bible. These include Jehovah and Yahweh. Mauro Biglino also agrees that these entities were members of the Elohim. Islam has personalized its representation of God by assigning a name, that name being Allah. The Buddha rejected the existence of an omnipotent creator God as a contradiction of the doctrine of dependent arising. This states that everything is a result of causes and nothing can arise uncaused. Buddhism does, however, embrace and propagate the concept of universal consciousness, but this has nothing to do with God or gods, which are considered to be part of samsara or unenlightened existence. The Hindus, like many other ancient cultures, including the Greeks, the Vikings, and most pagans, are polytheistic and believe in a pantheon of multiple gods. The Christian concept of God is the omnipotent creator of heaven and earth, a separate, external, eternal entity that resides in heaven and has direct dominion over our lives, the earth, and everything else. The Lord's Prayer begins with the poetic appellation, I quote, "Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Unquote. Where this concept originated is unclear. Mauro Biglino vehemently denies that it exists anywhere in the Old Testament, and I equally vehemently deny that it came from Yeshua, all such references being the result of mistranslation. Yeshua allegedly used the words, translated from many biblical and apocryphal sources, God and Father. I dispute translations that equate his reference to the Father as a reference to God. They are separate and distinct aspects of mind or the divinity that resides within all of us. Some modern people refer to God as the old man upstairs. His largely undefined and indefinable nature leaves plenty of room for personal interpretations, and many people, including many evangelical Christians, believe that they are in daily direct communion with their God. People have visions and hear voices, which they attribute to their personal concept of God. Others believe that they will make the acquaintance of their Creator after death. In this work, I have tended towards the terms universal consciousness, infinite spirit, the ground luminosity, and the quantum field to try to convey the concept usually referred to as deity. My concept of deity is based on the Buddhist model that does not recognize any form of divinity outside of mind. Polytheistic concepts of gods and goddesses exist, but only in samsara, the 6 realms of unenlightened existence. The entity we call God is a projection of ego into the illusion we call reality. Once we realize that reality is a product of our minds, just like ego, ideas like angry, wrathful, jealous gods start to make more sense. The divine is the antithesis of these things. They are reflective, pathetic human emotions. Angry, wrathful, and jealous are symptoms of an overdeveloped ego. While we are focused on these weaknesses, we are distracted from our pursuit of, or even curiosity about, what actual divinity is. They distract our awareness away from the inner source, which is diametrically opposed to these worthless, ignorant things. Ego is our personal contribution to the illusion. Our belief in an imaginary self that might somehow exist after death is the ultimate ignorance. This amplification and projection into the divine realm, exactly what they did to Yeshua, by the way, can be considered to be an intellectually reasonable extension of this delusion. It's common sense, the opposite of wisdom. Wisdom requires the negation of ego to become accessible. Perhaps for this reason, Christianity is performing a useful function in our world. We are not all ready to wake up and try to take control of our mind. Yeshua's wisdom, love thy neighbor, do unto others, etc., does provide comfort and solace to those who aren't yet ready to embrace reality, and it improves their thinking, behavior, and lives. However, belief in an external God is an impediment to real spiritual development. It is belief in a cosmic ego and some undefined implication that ego will somehow save ego. Ego is pure selfishness. It cannot save anything except money, and it's the only cause of this curse, selfishness, in our world, and selfishness begets greed. If you can conquer ego and thereby develop an awareness of your personal inner divinity and learn how to recognize and become it, then you can take control. Control of what? That will change as a result of this process, but it will become obvious. Control must be wrested away from this imaginary superego we call God. It did not create the world and cannot save us from death. Submission to it and groveling before it to beg for its forgiveness is merely a form of ego appeasement and is simply not the answer. It will not save you from your imaginary self. The words of Yeshua, saying 70 from the Gospel of Thomas, I quote, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." Unquote. Salvation comes from within. The concept of a goddess is not present in most modern religions. God is a purely male phenomenon, and this view has formed the basis of the patriarchal systems which have dominated recent human history. A few years ago, I wrote and published the following poem. G, O, and D. The library stood 5 stories tall. Looking up from its entrance, the children felt small. Inside they could smell all the dusty old books and feel the silence enforced by harsh looks. Off to one side were some tables and chairs, and beside them was a large set of stairs. A gaping invitation, the sweet promise of so much more, lurking above on the upper floors. But an old priest was seated right there at the bottom, and when the children approached, he leaned forward and stopped them. "I'm sorry, but you can't go up there. All the books that you need are right down here." One little boy thought that this wasn't fair. He asked the priest, "What's up those stairs?" "There's only 3 letters, G, O, and D. There really is nothing that you want to see." A little girl didn't listen and snuck round behind. She ran up the stairs to see what she could find. There was another big room filled with books at the top, but the stairs kept going up, so she didn't stop. She climbed up further to another big room where more books on more shelves headed off into the gloom. This time she decided to take a good look, so she went to a shelf and opened a book. It was all about reincarnation, and another was about alien visitation. There were books about pyramids and books about karma, books about the afterlife and spiritual armor. There was a book about dreams and one about hate, and another that simply called itself fate. She put them all back and returned to the stairs. They kept going up, so she swallowed her fears, and up she climbed till she reached the 4th floor, where if she hadn't seen enough books already, were more. She took another book from another shelf, but this one was all about herself. In shock, she dropped the book on the floor and ran up more stairs to escape what she just saw. The top floor was different. It was bathed in white light. She stopped on the stairs, amazed at the sight. She could make out some people and asked, "Who are you?" A man stepped forward and said, "Hi, I'm Lao Tzu, and these are my friends, Jesus, Plato, and Mohammed." "Wait a minute," said the girl. "I thought you were dead." "We're all just fine, but they murdered our words and made our messages completely absurd." Another man stepped forward, and with a radiant smile he said, "I'm Gautama the Buddha. Welcome, my child. Take this with you so you never forget." And he gave her a lotus as their eyes met. Suddenly the girl woke up in her bed. It was all just a dream. It was all in her head. But as she got up, she couldn't but notice that in her hand she still held the lotus. Appendix 2. Satan. The devil, also known as Lucifer, Beelzebub, or Satan, is the opposite of God. He's not loving and he doesn't care. He is the ultimate sinner. According to some very old books, he began his career as an archangel, but he rebelled against what he considered the tyranny of God, who didn't forgive him or turn his other cheek, but instead cast him down into the blazing eternal pits of suffering in hell. According to Wikipedia, I quote, "A devil is the mythical personification of evil as it is conceived in various cultures and religious traditions. It is seen as the objectification of a hostile and destructive force. unquote. A further quote about Satan. I quote, Satan, also known as the devil, is an entity in Abrahamic religions who seduces humans into sin or falsehood. In Judaism, Satan is seen as an agent subservient to God, typically regarded as a metaphor for the Yetzer Hara, or evil inclination. In Christianity and Islam, he is usually seen as a fallen angel or jinn who has rebelled against God, who nevertheless allows him temporary power over the fallen world and a host of demons, unquote. Or for a slightly more enlightened perspective, we can listen to Michael Hutchence from the rock band In Excess. The devil inside, every single one of us, the devil inside, unquote. In part 4 of The Falling of the Gods, Mauro Biglino explains, Satan is one who fulfills the function of adversary. He is not the prince of devils. He's not some guy, not a spiritual entity. It is a function which can be translated as adversary, unquote. In Christianity and Islam, Satan is the boss of hell, the realm of eternal fire and torture. He is the ultimate anti-nice, mega-evil lord of darkness. In pictures, he is usually portrayed with horns protruding from his head and other very goat-like features, carrying a pitchfork. The source of this imagery was most likely the great pagan goat god Pan. In the Bible, Satan was the guy who thought that through sheer temptation he could make the Son of God get down on his knees and worship him. Unfortunately, due to the fact that God allegedly created everything in 6 days, all that Satan had to offer Jesus was all the stuff his Father had already bequeathed unto him, being the only begotten Son of God. While the Bible presents this as some kind of deal that Jesus could have done to have personally advanced himself in some mysterious way, it is clearly nothing of the sort. It's like being offered your own car in exchange for telling the offerer that he is a much better driver than you are. I won't even sully the porky bin with this one, it's just stupid. Satan represents evil, but as dictated by the rampant sexism of the men in dresses, he is always completely and unquestionably male. The personification of ultimate evil would have been a great place for the medieval misogynists to have placed a woman, but no, they stayed on their rails and Lucifer is decidedly masculine. Had the Romans had any imagination, the Temptations, with Jesus all alone in the desert, could have been a great place to stage the ultimate battle of the sexes. The temptress lady devil attempting to seduce Jesus into some kind of kinky, submissive role. That would have put some actual skin in the game and got a lot of teenage boys enthusiastically onto the pews right up until the invention of free internet porn. At the genesis of it all, God did not create Adam and Eve. He created Adam, a man. God was quite happy with Adam, but Adam needed Eve. God didn't need Eve, but he created her anyway out of Adam's rib so that Adam wouldn't get so bored in paradise when God was too busy managing the universe to play with him. The tempter in the Garden of Eden was not Satan, but some imposter serpent left over from another obsolete pre-Pan culture. This is yet another inconsistency pointing towards the inauthenticity of the Bible and the incompatibility of the two testaments. The serpent, however, is generally understood to also have been male. He tempted Eve with an apple, not quite as extravagant as Satan's later grandiose offerings, but Eve, being a mere female, was weak and folded like a deck chair on the Titanic, and that was that, again, for eternity. Serpents don't possess arms or hands, so it is unclear how the apple was offered to Eve. Perhaps the serpent held it in its mouth, or maybe he merely hissed in its general direction. This transgression was deemed so heinous that they were both, along with the rest of us, cast out of paradise forever. Eve was the sole cause of why Adam was kicked out of paradise by God, whom the Jewish scriptures assure us is a jealous God. So Satan didn't get to manifest the female wisdom principle as a counterweight to male absurdity, either at the very beginning in the Garden of Eden or when he personally tempted Jesus in the desert. Add to this that God had a son to a woman who, it is claimed, remained a virgin throughout the entire process, and an extremely unpalatable conclusion looms. Following the logic of these assertions, I am forced to reluctantly ask the inevitable question, is God gay, and was Lucifer his boyfriend? Appendix 3. Heaven and Hell. These two mythical places or states are total opposites. It is impossible to imagine anything or anywhere any more opposite, and they are both as extreme as anything could ever be. They stand in stark contrast to life on earth, which sits uncomfortably between them, sharing some attributes of both. Heaven is also referred to as paradise, a place where nothing can be improved or made any better in any way. It is an absolute, the highest and best, most wonderful, most desirable destination possible. It is the domain of God, or in some cultures, the gods who live in eternal bliss. Hell, also known as Hades or the underworld, is portrayed as a burning, miserable sight of immeasurable suffering. It doesn't get any worse than hell, and if anybody could imagine anything worse, then you can be sure that it already exists in vast quantities in hell. It is the domain of Satan, the anti-God, who apparently doesn't even have a sense of humor. Heaven and hell predate Christianity, having originated in ancient Mesopotamia. The underworld was known as Kur or Urkala, and heavenly realms were associated with the Agigi, a group of deities who resided in the upper heavens. The highest heaven was the abode of the sky god Anu. Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, defined these primitive conceptions of the afterlife, promising the righteous a paradise of light and joy, and the wicked eternal punishment and separation from the divine presence. During the Babylonian exile, the Jews absorbed Zoroastrian eschatological concepts, including resurrection, judgment, and heaven and hell. These ideas were incorporated into Judaism and were inherited by Christianity. They are the proverbial carrot and stick used by Christianity to control people's behavior and force them to obey the will of God Almighty as presented in the Bible. 1,000 years ago, during the Dark Ages, heaven was considered to be physically above the earth, existing somewhere in the sky. Modern space travel and instruments like the Hubble telescope have revealed the absurdity of this notion. Likewise, hell being considered somewhere below has been shown to be an absurdity. In Christianity, these two mysterious realms are somehow able to exist without any sexual component, which on earth is a major factor in the allocation of pleasure and pain. Islam takes the Judeo-Christian concept of God to even greater extremes, promising that believers will be served by 70 virgins while they recline on beds of jewels surrounded by springs of the finest wine. Most of the pleasures the Holy Quran denies them in this life are apparently available in abundance in paradise. The Prophet Muhammad was unable to add to the sufferings in hell, and its conception in Islam is similar to Christianity. Heaven and hell also exist within the Buddhist concept of reality. They are two of the 6 realms of samsara, or unenlightened existence. Neither are considered worthy goals of rebirth, a person's residence in either not being eternal, but limited to the period when the karma that resulted in what is considered an unfavorable rebirth in either is used up or expires. They are considered unfavorable because it is not possible to be exposed to the Dharma, the teachings of Buddha, or the immutable nature of reality in either. Nowhere in the Gospel of Thomas is there a single reference to hell. The following are all the sayings in the Gospel of Thomas that pertain to or mention the kingdom of heaven. Saying 3, I quote, "If your leaders tell you, 'Look, the kingdom is in heaven,' then the birds of heaven will precede you. If they tell you it's in the sea, then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is within you and outside of you. When you know yourselves, then you'll be known, and you'll realize that you're the children of the living Father. But if you don't know yourselves, then you live in poverty, and you are the poverty." Unquote. Saying 11, I quote, "This heaven will disappear, and the one above it will disappear too. Those who are dead aren't alive, and those who are living won't die. In the days when you ate what was dead, you made it alive. When you're in the light, what will you do? On the day when you were one, you became divided. But when you became divided, what will you do?" Unquote. Saying 20, I quote, "The disciples asked Jesus, 'What can the kingdom of heaven be compared to?' He said to them, 'It can be compared to a mustard seed. Though it's the smallest of the seeds, when it falls on tilled soil, it makes a plant so large that it shelters the birds of heaven." Unquote. Saying 22, I quote, "Jesus saw some little children nursing. He said to his disciples, 'These nursing children can be compared to those who enter the kingdom.' They said to him, 'Then we'll enter the kingdom as little children?' Jesus answered them, 'When you make the two into one, and make the inner like the outer, and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower, and so make the male and the female a single one, so that the male won't be male, nor the female female, when you make eyes in the place of an eye, a hand in the place of a hand, a foot in the place of a foot, and an image in the place of an image, then you'll enter the kingdom." Unquote. Saying 44, I quote, "Whoever blasphemes the Father will be forgiven, and whoever blasphemes the Son will be forgiven. But whoever blasphemes the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven, neither on earth nor in heaven." Unquote. Saying 46, I quote, "From Adam to John the Baptizer, no one's been born who's so much greater than John the Baptizer, so they shouldn't avert their eyes. But I say that whoever among you will become a little child will know the kingdom and will become greater than John." Unquote. Saying 49, quote, "Blessed are those who are one, those who are chosen, because you'll find the kingdom. You've come from there and will return there." Unquote. Saying 54, quote, "Blessed are those who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven." Unquote. Saying 57, quote, "My Father's kingdom can be compared to someone who had good seed. Their enemy came by night and sowed weeds amongst the good seed. The person didn't let anyone pull out the weeds, so that you don't pull out the wheat along with the weeds, they said to them. On the day of the harvest, the weeds will be obvious, then they'll be pulled out and burned." Unquote. Saying 76, I quote, "The Father's kingdom can be compared to a merchant with merchandise who found a pearl. The merchant was wise. They sold their merchandise and bought that single pearl for themselves. You too, look for the treasure that doesn't perish but endures, where no moths come to eat and no worms destroy." Unquote. Saying 82, I quote, "Whoever is near me is near the fire, and whoever is far from me is far from the kingdom." Unquote. Saying 96, I quote, "The Father's kingdom can be compared to a woman who took a little yeast and hid it in flour. She made it into large loaves of bread. Anyone who has ears to hear should hear." Unquote. Saying 97, quote, "The Father's kingdom can be compared to a woman carrying a jar of flour. While she was walking down a long road, the jar's handle broke and the flour spilled out behind her on the road. She didn't know it and didn't realize there was a problem until she got home, put down the jar, and found it empty." Unquote. Saying 98, I quote, "The Father's kingdom can be compared to a man who wanted to kill someone powerful. He drew his sword in his house and drove it into the wall to figure out whether his hand was strong enough. Then he killed the powerful one." Unquote. Saying 99, I quote, "The disciples said to him, 'Your brothers and mother are standing outside.' He said to them, 'The people here who do the will of my Father are my brothers and mother. They're the ones who will enter my Father's kingdom." Unquote. Saying 107, quote, "The kingdom can be compared to a shepherd who had 100 sheep. The largest one strayed. He left the 99 and looked for the one until he found it. Having gone through the trouble, he said to the sheep, I love you more than the 99. Unquote. Saying 109. Quote, the kingdom can be compared to someone who had a treasure hidden in their field. They didn't know about it. After they died, they left it to their son. The son didn't know it either. He took the field and sold it. The buyer ploughed the field, found the treasure, and began to loan money at interest to whomever they wanted. Unquote. Saying 113, I quote, his disciples said to him, when will the kingdom come? It won't come by looking for it. They won't say, look over here or look over there. Rather, the Father's kingdom is already spread out over the earth and people don't see it. Unquote. Saying 114, Simon Peter said to them, Mary should leave us because women aren't worthy of life. Jesus said, look, am I to make her a man so that she may become a living spirit too? She's equal to you men because every woman who makes herself manly will enter the kingdom of heaven. Unquote. The kingdom of heaven is mentioned much more frequently in the Gospel of Thomas than either God or the Father. Yeshua often referred to the Father's heaven, which indicates that we can only get to heaven through the Father. The Christian interpretation of this is all the God stuff, but if this is seen in terms of mind and we can accept that the Father corresponds to the deepest level of individual consciousness, the Tibetan concept of Rigpa, then Yeshua was telling us that we can only get to universal consciousness through Rigpa, through our own personal depth consciousness. When we are aware of and living in Rigpa, we are in heaven. We are aware that we are the universe and know this profound connection as our actual experience of reality. It becomes very clear from reading these sayings that Yeshua's concept of heaven was very different to the ancient Jewish version that is accepted by Judaism and Christianity. These sayings do not support the Christian assertion that heaven is the abode of their God, which we might enter after we die, if and only if we have faithfully believed the men in dresses. Yeshua clearly states through these sayings that it is up to us to discover heaven within ourselves. By doing this, we can turn our ordinary reality into the kingdom of heaven. The Buddhist concept of nirvana or enlightened existence is much closer to the ideas expressed by Yeshua in the Gospel of Thomas. Appendix 4. Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. These two apparently harmless icons of Christianity form the vital first steps of Christian indoctrination. They are introduced into children's lives before they can even talk and are associated with gifts and magical events, locked in with seminal Christian ceremonies. Every child in every Christian country knows and loves Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny by the time they celebrate their second birthday. This has the effect of demonstrating to children that in Christian societies, lying is acceptable. When they realize or are told that Santa and the Bunny are fabrications, they've been lied to for many years by their elders and their religion. And not only that, an enormous part of their culture, its major traditions, celebrations and holidays are based on obvious lies and deceit. Santa Claus is indelibly linked to Christmas, which purports to celebrate Jesus' birthday. This, of course, is rubbish because nobody knows the date of Yeshua's birth to within the nearest 7 years. The myths surrounding it, with the baby Jesus in the manger and the 3 wise men, make for beautiful Christmas cards, but have absolutely no basis in historical reality. It's all made-up fantasy to inveigle children into accepting the wonderfulness of Christianity. The church threw everything into Christmas. There's cheery old Santa in his red suit riding a magic sleigh pulled by flying reindeer from his elf-infested home at the North Pole and delivering presents to every good child in the world. There's the beautifully decorated Christmas tree with a fairy or a star at the top and fake snow to make it appear even more magical. Then there's presents. Lots of them from Santa and Mum and Dad and Sister and Uncle Phil and Auntie Jan. Then there's lavish feasting, where children are encouraged to stuff themselves with chocolate and other unhealthy sugary food until they're nearly sick. And of course, the church doesn't pay for any of it. They leave that to the parents with the admonition that if they don't spend a lot of money and make it really special, then they don't love their children. Santa is a strange character who can roughly be traced back to St. Nicholas, the 4th century bishop of Myra who attended the Council of Nicaea. Apparently he was very generous and saved 3 girls from having to become prostitutes. How he managed to become eternal and get to the North Pole isn't credibly covered in any of his biographic literature. His most memorable line is, "Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christ my ass." The Easter Bunny is another total oddity. It's an imaginary rabbit that gives children chocolate Easter eggs. Children seldom ask where the rabbit got the eggs from. They are simply overwhelmed by its cuddly cuteness, then bribed to keep quiet with mouthfuls of chocolate. Why would a 2-year-old argue with that? Easter is supposed to commemorate the crucifixion and alleged resurrection of Jesus. The actual dates of these events are known, but the celebration of Easter was changed by the bishops at the Council of Nicaea, who felt no need to preserve any sort of historical authenticity. Easter was moved to coincide with the pagan ceremony of the equinox, with the worship of the pagan goddess Esther also lumped in, so that the Christian ceremony could be surreptitiously substituted without upsetting the pagan calendar. The Easter Bunny is the second part of the real Christian trinity of Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and God. By the age of 10, if a child hasn't worked it out yet that Santa and the Bunny aren't real, their parents tell them. However, this doesn't apply to God, whom their parents keep insisting is real, otherwise they and their children will all burn for eternity in hell. The reason why Yeshua is not part of this trinity is because he was actually real, unlike the other 3. The bunny's gender is never specified, but he can be assumed to be male, and he was co-opted from some other pagan nonsense after centuries of misunderstandings and embellishment. None of it was the product of an originally brilliant, creative Christian mind. It was all just uninspired plagiarism, cobbled together by committees of unimaginative charlatans with ulterior motives towards children. Google, the modern god of misinformation, says this via Wikipedia. I quote, "Easter is the festival of Estrae, which honored the goddess of fertility and spring. Proudly, supposedly, the goddess's animal symbol was a rabbit, which have long traditionally symbolized fertility due to their high reproduction rates." Unquote. Since rabbits are mammals and thus give birth to live young, you might be wondering why the Easter Bunny is said to lay eggs on the holiday. The answer may be as simple as the fact that eggs, like the rabbit, have long been an ancient pagan symbol of fertility, rebirth, and new life, all things associated with the springtime celebration of Estrae. From a Christian perspective, eggs for Easter are said to represent Jesus' resurrection and his emergence from the tomb. According to History.com, I quote, "The tradition of decorating eggs for Easter may date back to the 13th century, when eggs were traditionally a forbidden food during the Lent season, which is why people would decorate them as the fasting period came to an end and then eat them as a way to celebrate Easter Sunday." Unquote. So clearly, Christmas and Easter are completely fictitious constructs originally designed to replace valid pagan ceremonies which were synchronized with the seasons and other natural cycles, honoring the earth and nature. There is no historical or doctrinal significance attached to their dominant position in the Christian religious pantheon of demonstrably demented absurdity. They are proudly presented with no other motive than to corrupt and soften the minds of children into accepting that the world they were born into is completely mad and some utterly irrational things must be accepted for a while or you could burn in hell forever. According to 1775 Bible Found That Proves We're Living a Lie by Wise Quotes, I quote, "The loss of this creative autonomy can also be seen in how we treat religious festivities. Christmas, for example, carries origins much older than Christianity. Originally, it was a ritual of light's rebirth celebrated just after the winter solstice. It was the turning point when the sun, after reaching its minimum, began to grow again in the sky. It was a call to look within, recognize the darkness, and prepare the soul for light's return. However, what was introspection has now become rush. What was symbolism has become showcase. Instead of looking inward, we look at store windows. Spirituality was traded for consumption, and with it, we lost a powerful window of inner manifestation. Easter still maintains a subtle connection with lunar cycles. The date changes every year because it's defined by the first full moon after the spring equinox. This detail, almost always ignored, is crucial. Ancient peoples believed the full moon was the peak of manifestation energy. It was the moment to harvest what had been planted with intention weeks before. Celebrating Easter was, symbolically, celebrating the resurrection not only of Christ, but of human creative energy itself. Today, the festivity has become synonymous with chocolate and commercial calendars. The connection to celestial cycles remains there, discrete, but collective consciousness no longer perceives it. Unquote. Appendix 5. Miracles. If a friend told you they'd heard the voice of God and that he spoke to them regularly, you would probably recommend they seek psychiatric help for their condition. If they told you that they went to a party and somebody turned water into wine and they were still serious after you stopped laughing, you might then ask them what else they'd taken. In the scientific age, most of the so-called miracles credited to Jesus would land whoever claimed they'd witnessed them in a mental hospital. But because they are said to have happened 2,000 years ago and are written down in a big badass book, some people are prepared to suspend their reason and intelligence and base their entire life's philosophy on the belief that these impossible events actually happened. Miracles are a form of magic. They are events that can only be assigned supernatural causes. Their sole cause is the will of some abnormally powerful being capable of suspending the laws of nature. The 18th century Scottish philosopher David Hume made this statement, I quote, "It is strange that such prodigious events do not happen in our days, but it is nothing strange that men should lie in all ages." Unquote. The Nag Hammadi Gospels do not contain miracles, and the sources from India are also completely devoid of them. It appears the Romans wanted to stuff as many into the Bible as could possibly be accommodated to emphasize their political imperative that Jesus was God. And maybe they did really seem credible to people with acute lead poisoning. Jesus is credited with 8 types of miracles. Firstly, turning water into wine. Number 2, casting out evil spirits. 3, healing the blind, deaf, sick, injured, and infirmed. 4, feeding thousands of people with a few loaves and fishes. 5, walking on water. 6, controlling the elements of nature. 7, causing his disciples to catch lots of fish. 8, raising the dead, including himself. These alleged miracles can be explained in a number of rational ways. The most obvious is the pens of the Roman editors of the Gospels who simply made stuff up. Secondly, miracles can be tricks played on the gullible by professional showmen. Many world-famous magicians have made their fortunes by creating apparent miracles through carefully managing the perceptions of their audience. They design specialized equipment to this effect and are able to entertain intelligent, perceptive people with their artful contrivances by appearing to temporarily suspend the laws of cause and effect. They are able to conjure effects that ordinary people cannot explain, making things seem to appear and disappear or become something else entirely. They fully understand the causes of what they are doing, which is why they can do it. They can also explain how they did it and teach others to perform the same tricks. Thirdly, miracles can be natural events which occur by coincidence within a specified time frame that makes them seem to be caused by a prediction or some otherwise unrelated action. Fourth, miracles can be the result of mind-altering drugs. Fifth, they can be caused by hypnotism. Sixth are the fruits of advanced yogic realization. This comes closest to explaining some of Yeshua's alleged miracles. People who have spent a lot of time training their minds and bodies can achieve feats that are unimaginable to ordinary folks. There was the case of the Hindu yogi who was able to tow a truck loaded with people using a rope attached to his penis. I saw video of this feat and it appeared to be really authentic. The yogis of Tibet are vividly aware of their past lives and are reputed to be able to control their death and rebirth. This is not considered miraculous in that culture. And finally, there is what science calls the placebo effect, which is one of the few spiritual processes that science has discovered and which it usually ignores as anomalous. The Buddha taught dependent arising. According to this doctrine, which is central to the laws of karma and rebirth, all phenomena arise naturally due to causes. You are a dependent arising. You were originally dependent on the acts of your mother and father and are currently dependent on the conditions on earth which allow you to survive. In some ways, the fact that you are alive can be considered a miracle. Somebody waving their arms around and pulling scary faces is not a cause of physical reality. It may cause children to be scared, but it won't make it rain. Dependent arising is more complex than simple cause and effect because it postulates multiple causes for everything, and all the causes also have multiple causes, which is in contrast with science, which postulates single measurable causes in a chain of events, causes that can be isolated from the whole and observed. The idea that God is the cause of miracles is central to the Christian doctrine and only requires one cause, faith. Faith precludes rational analysis, and that is why Christianity and science have been in opposition throughout history. Miracles are not scientific. According to What Was History's Biggest Cover-Up? The Dark Ages, by Bedtime History, I quote, "Miracles became the answer for everything that was not allowed to have an answer. That narrative was not harmless. It stripped away the belief in human potential. It smothered the desire to question, and it left future generations too afraid to ask, if not a miracle, then what?" Unquote. If you could be transported back in time to the 1st century with your smartphone, you could perform miracles. There would be no internet to log on to and no telephone network, so your device's functions would be very limited. But your 21st century technology would make you capable of performing miracles for as long as your battery lasted. Taking a photo or making a video would be considered miraculous. If you had any music recorded with modern instruments and production techniques, that would be miraculous. Basic functions like the torch or even just being able to see your reflection would be considered miraculous. A miracle is only a miracle until we understand the science underlying what's happening, and then it becomes technology. So said Greg Braden in Are You Blocking the Universe's Gift? You understand a small percentage of the causes of these miracles. You know how to manipulate your device so these miracles can happen. Just as we have achieved great advances in technology, it is also possible to achieve spiritual advancement. However, unlike a smartphone, spiritual advancement is not a marketable commodity and cannot be mass-produced. It must be realized over time by individuals. An individual who has attained a high level of spiritual development, like Yeshua or Buddha, is capable of achieving results, the causes of which other less spiritually advanced individuals are not capable of understanding. They see miracles. They are not aware of what could possibly cause such effects and ascribe it to the will of that particular individual. Spiritual development is not a trick, just like producing beautiful music from an instrument is not a trick. It's an ability which must be cultivated over a long period of time. Yeshua had obviously learned a few tricks on the road and was able to impress ignorant, illiterate people with deeds that they couldn't explain. He had the ability to manipulate forces like group resonance and mass expectation. He was a master showman, and he was also a healer. He may have learnt advanced esoteric techniques in India, Tibet, or Egypt. Faith can move mountains, cure gout and leprosy, but not ignorance. There was no follow-up to these allegedly miraculously cured people. No scientific studies were conducted, and maybe they died a few days or even hours later. How would we know? Where are the statistics? The Bible doesn't record the percentage of miracle cures that persisted after the Jesus show left town. Yeshua was living in the unscientific miasma of faith and madness that ruled first century Israel. He had rock star charisma, and believing in him was a lot better than not believing in him. Hope is better than hopelessness. Miracles happen reasonably easily amongst uneducated, gullible people who really want to believe there's a Messiah who is going to save them from the murderous Romans. But raising people from the dead requires exceptional editors. He didn't do that in graveyards where the raised were able to crawl up from out of the earth. He did it in places where there were no doctors present, no machines to register heartbeats, and maybe they were just faking it to get the attention of the Messiah. How dead is dead? And even after multiple alleged raisings of the dead, there were still a lot of people who didn't believe it. If somebody really could bring a dead person back to life, that would be the ultimate game changer in any society anywhere. If it really happened and credible people witnessed it, surely it would be a slam dunk. But apparently not in first century Israel. That's what happens with no Facebook. The city people, who were more likely to be literate, were more skeptical, while the less literate country folk were quite happy to accept a new universal cure for absolutely anything. And don't forget that all the so-called canonical Gospels were meticulously tailored by power-mad Romans to ensure that the Roman Empire has survived into the 21st century. Their primary motives were not the salvation of the human race, nor historical accuracy. They didn't even need to maintain an entertaining narrative. The men in dresses were quite happy to burn people alive if they dared to question any of their spurious nonsense. The Romans believed that the government could dictate what the people believed. They were not bound by quaint concepts like rationality or sensibleness, and at that time, even mathematics was considered a Greek heresy. Their preferred answer to difficult questions was, "Put them to the sword." Appendix 6. Sin. Sin is a transgression against divine law. Each culture has its own interpretation of what it means to commit a sin. While sins are generally considered actions, any thought, word, or act considered immoral, selfish, shameful, harmful, or alienating might be termed sinful. That was a quote from Wikipedia. The Christian Church lists the 7 deadly sins as 1. Pride, 2. Lust, 3. Envy, 4. Anger, 5. Greed, 6. Gluttony, 7. Sloth. These are not sins, they are afflictive emotions, and this is yet another symptom of an inconsistent doctrine that is not grounded in wisdom. The Old Testament contained the alleged 10 commandments of God, none of which deals with any of the 7 deadly sins listed above. I attended law school, and the 10 commandments are amongst the most sloppy, ill-conceived attempts at writing law that I've ever encountered. Most of them are primitive tribal superstition, allegedly brought down from an unspecified mountain by the prophet Moses. To be nice about it, whoever wrote these laws was an amateur with no understanding of basic judicial principles. They are neither comprehensive nor universally applicable. So here we go, the 10 commandments. Number 1, I am the Lord thy God, and there are no other gods but me. Number 2, no graven images or likenesses. Number 3, do not take the Lord's name in vain. The first 3 commandments are like an adolescent boyfriend trying to stop his girlfriend from flirting at parties. 1, you are my date. So 2, no selfies with other guys. And 3, don't tell him you think I'm a jerk with a small penis, okay? If God really was the omnipotent ruler of the universe, he wouldn't have to insist on any of that. They start to become more sensible when instead of being the commandments of God, they are recognized as the commandments of the Elohim. As explained in Appendix 1, God, the word Elohim is a plural and refers to a group of unspecified beings who ruled over humanity during prehistoric times. It appears these beings had different areas of control, and they were not only in conflict, but actually fought wars against each other. These are documented in the Sumerian tablets as battles fought between 2 Anunnaki brothers, Enki and Enlil. These extraterrestrial battles are also clearly described in the ancient Indian Mahabharata and in the legends of a large number of other cultures, from the Australian Aboriginals to the American and Mesoamerican Indians. If the first 3 commandments are considered in this light, they can be more realistically interpreted to mean: 1, you are not to work for other Elohim. 2, you must not depict other Elohim. 3, you are not to bow down and worship any other Elohim. The other 7 commandments are crude attempts to impose some form of law which doesn't necessarily involve the Elohim overlords and can be considered primitive, ill-conceived attempts to regulate ordinary human conduct. Number 4, remember the Sabbath. So not remembering what day it is a sin unless it's Tuesday or Friday or some of the other days that I forgot. Tribal nonsense and an obvious absurdity. God allegedly didn't do anything on the 7th day, so you better not either, for that is a sin. Got it? Number 5, honor thy mother and thy father, even if your dad just raped you or your mum's a junkie who stole your girlfriend's purse. This is a nice generalization and could be deemed common sense, but it isn't wisdom, and it's unrealistic in some modern domestic situations. Does that apply to your stepfather or stepmother? We don't need an eternal, all-powerful God to command us to respect our genetic donors. If they are respectable, it will happen naturally. Number 6, thou shalt not kill. This sounds strong and reasonable, but it's pretty vague. Kill what? Does that mean thou shalt not choppeth down a tree? Does it mean we should all be vegans and never buy a plastic bag or flush the toilet because pollution kills things? If that's what it means, great, but I doubt that many modern Christians can live like that. Unless they're vegetarians, they rely on other people to do their killing for them. The purest interpretation is you should only eat fruit and vegetables that don't require you to kill the plant that bore them. But what if I only eat apples and grapes, but accidentally stand on an ant? Is that a sin? Number 7, thou shalt not commit adultery. Was adultery really the worst sexual crime anybody could commit in 1000 BC or whenever God came up with this mega porky? What about rape, incest, or their favorite, pedophilia? Presenting this as the most despicable sexual sin is a sin in itself. It reeks of cover-up and is proof that none of this came from anywhere divine. If Uncle Fred rapes my sister, that's okay. He can still go to heaven. But if him and Mum disappear for half an hour at our Christmas party and return looking slightly dishevelled but a lot happier, they shall burn in hell for eternity. This commandment begins to make sense in light of this passage from the Gospel of Philip. I quote, "One was born of adultery, for he was the son of the serpent. He became a murderer like his father, and he killed his brother. Every act of sexual intercourse between those unlike each other is adultery." Unquote. It is most likely that this is another reference to the mysterious Elohim, whose presence infuses the Old Testament. If adultery is redefined as having sex with something that is not human, it makes this commandment far more credible. Number 8, thou shalt not steal. At last, some clear rational guidance. Thank God. Number 9, thou shalt not bear false witness. Why didn't God just tell us not to lie? False witness is a form of lying, but there are many more ways to be willfully deceitful. The Bible is full of them. Moses, by claiming that the omnipotent creator of the universe commanded this, was bearing false witness. Or, more likely, the succession of ordinary people who handed down the oral tradition spent too much time arguing around the campfire about what it really meant and came up with this compromise. The sad fact that most ordinary people are liars gives God an excuse for this failure to make a definitive statement about telling lies. Number 10, coveting. Basically, thou shalt not desire thy neighbour's stuff whilst thou art loving him. Do not desire his wife, nor his slaves, nor any of his very sexy camels or goats. Moses climbed all the way to the top of a mountain for that. It sounds like he took a few too many of John the Baptist's magic mushrooms on the way up before God spoke to him. That was the Old Testament approach to sins, and the only reason why any unindoctrinated person would consider any of it credible is their own ignorance and its ancientness. The Romans knew so much more about committing sins. They were experts, but for some reason, they decided they had to stop everybody else from having any fun. This is one of the few aspects of Christianity that I personally don't understand. That the most immoral, murderous, slave-raping paragons of pagan sensual excess suddenly decided to deny themselves and everybody else the joys of sin is the only miracle I am prepared to recognize in the entire Christian debacle. According to Christian dogma, sin makes God so angry he will cast you into a furnace to burn and suffer for eternity. Even though he created you just the way you are, and he loves you as only an eternal caring father can, any of the above transgressions are enough for him to not accept his responsibility and uncreate you as one of his failures, but instead to force you to feel the most immense pain, misery, and suffering in a barely imaginable torture chamber forever. Really? But if you confess your sins, he will forgive you and thereby empower you to go out and commit a few more. And your eternally loving Father is all-knowing and all-seeing, so when you do actually stand on an ant, he will see and he will know. This is so ridiculous it almost makes me want to cry. Good loving people believe this. They believe it to be the basis of morality and ethics and think that not believing it is not being virtuous. It is ultimate crowd control and is about as spiritual as not having sex with your neighbour's goat. Firstly, the whole doctrine of forgiveness completely contradicts the law of karma. If all you have to do is confess your sins and tell God you're really sorry, and that purports to separate you from the negative consequences of your thoughts, words, and deeds, then karma is irrelevant. Karma is not irrelevant. Forgiveness of sins is ignorance. Nobody, even if they're a god or half a god or whatever, can assume responsibility for the karma of somebody else. Just like you can't volunteer to go to jail for a murderer so they can be free, nobody else can pay your karmic debt. You are responsible for what you do in this life, whether you do good or you are evil. The Buddha said, I quote, "By oneself is evil done. By oneself is one defiled. By oneself is good done. By oneself is one purified. Purity and impurity depend on oneself. No one can purify another." Unquote. Karma is not currency, nor is it a tradable commodity. Karma is indelibly attached to the one who created it and is the mechanism that determines rebirth. A more enlightened approach to good and evil is to equate good with wisdom and evil with ignorance. Sin is unskillful activity, the result of ignorance that creates bad karma. Virtue is skillful activity, the result of wisdom that creates good karma. Even if it was possible for somebody to die for your sins, this would not increase your wisdom. It would take away any incentive for you to modify any aspect of yourself, and by signing up for this, you are throwing away your power to 1. Improve, 2. Learn from your mistakes, and 3. Take control of your destiny. This is exactly what the Romans wanted. They liked slaves, but their slaves hated them. But then with Christianity, they found a way to turn everyone into slaves, requiring minimal external control and ensuring that their spiritual slaves wouldn't hate them and be constantly plotting against them. Instead, they marketed themselves as the only possible source of grace, and as a consequence, they were respected and even revered, while they secretly raped children. So, I would like to dispute Wikipedia's definition of sin and redefine it as the activities of the Christian church which continue to hijack people's personal spiritual development, continue to peddle ignorance as if it was virtue, and continue to practice their depraved sexual perversions on children. They and the other monotheistic religions that persist in their pernicious onslaught of ignorance are why humanity is unable to deal with the very real perils that confront us. Appendix 7. The Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas was discovered in Egypt in 1945 in clay jars which contained what we now refer to as the Nag Hammadi Library. Wikipedia states the following, I quote, "The Gospel of Thomas is a non-canonical sayings gospel. It was discovered near Nag Hammadi, Egypt in 1945 among a group of books known as the Nag Hammadi Library. Scholars speculate that the works were buried in response to a letter from Bishop Athanasius declaring a strict canon of Christian scripture. Most scholars place the composition during the 2nd century, while others have proposed dates as late as 250 AD, with signs of origins perhaps dating back to 60 AD, unquote. The Gospel of Thomas contains no narrative and is simply a collection of 114 statements attributed directly to the Master Yeshua. According to the Gospel of Thomas itself, these sayings were written down by Didymus Judas Thomas, otherwise referred to as the beloved disciple, and whose ossuary marked Judah, son of Yeshua, was found inside the Talpiot tomb. If these assumptions are correct, it was Yeshua's son who wrote down his father's words and not the Apostle Thomas, whom mainstream religionists have credited with this gospel's creation. But even if all those assumptions or one vital link in the chain are not correct, this gospel is a goldmine of profound wisdom expressed magnificently by an enlightened master. They could just as easily be the words of Lao Tzu or the Buddha. It contains nothing pertaining to the crucifixion, resurrection, or any mention of messianic proclivities which form the basis of the Christian religion. There are no references to hell, miracles, or the Christ. The sayings contain no context and are open to a number of different interpretations. There are also issues of translation and transliteration, which I dealt with in detail in the chapter Translation. So bearing in mind all the above caveats, I have selected the sayings that I believe refer to the following subjects which I have elaborated on in the chapter Decoding the Bible. Firstly, individual consciousness, or SEM, the illusion of self. Saying 8, I quote, "The human being is like a wise fisher who casts a net into the sea and drew it up from the sea full of little fish. Among them, the wise fisher found a fine large fish and cast all the little fish back down into the sea, easily choosing the large fish. Anyone who has ears should hear." Unquote. Saying 28, I quote, "I stood in the middle of the world and appeared to them in the flesh. I found them all drunk. I didn't find any of them thirsty. My soul ached for the children of humanity because they were blind in their hearts and couldn't see. They came into the world empty and plan on leaving the world empty. Meanwhile, they're drunk. When they shake off their wine, then they'll change." Unquote. Saying 42, I quote, "Become passers-by." Unquote. Secondly, the subconscious or superconscious mind, rigpa, which has been mistranslated as father. The Syriac word Abba is often translated as father, but can also mean source or origin. Saying 15, I quote, "When you see the one who wasn't born of a woman, fall down on your face and worship that person. That's your father." Unquote. Saying 50, I quote, "If they ask you, where do you come from? Tell them, I've come from the light, the place where light came into being by itself, established itself, and appeared in their image. If they ask you, is it you? Then say, we are its children, and we're chosen by our living Father. If they ask you, what's the sign of your Father in you? Then say, it's movement and rest." Unquote. Saying 83, I quote, "Images are revealed to people, but the light within them is hidden in the image of the Father's light. He'll be revealed, but his image will be hidden by his light." Unquote. The following sayings refer to the meditative process of uniting the two aspects of individual mind, sem and rigpa. Saying 48, I quote, "If two make peace with each other in a single house, they'll say to the mountain, go away, and it will." Unquote. Saying 61, I quote, "Jesus said, two will recline on a couch, one will die, one will live. Salome said, who are you, mister? You have climbed onto my couch and eaten from my table as if you are from someone." Jesus said to her, "I am the one who comes from what is whole. I was granted from the things of my Father." "I am your disciple," she replied. "For this reason I say, if one is whole, one will be filled with light. But if one is divided, one will be filled with darkness." Unquote. Saying 77, I quote, "I'm the light that's over all. I am the all. The all has come from me and unfolds towards me. Split a log, I'm there. Lift a stone, and you will find me there." Unquote. Saying 112, I quote, "How awful for the flesh that depends on the soul. How awful for the soul that depends on the flesh." Unquote. Finally, these sayings refer to the third and deepest level of mind, universal consciousness, the ground luminosity, or God. Saying 59, I quote, "Look for the living one while you're still alive. If you die and then try to look for him, you won't be able to." Unquote. Saying 111, I quote, "The heavens and the earth will roll up in front of you, and whoever lives from the living one won't see death." Doesn't Jesus say, "Whoever finds themselves, of them the world isn't worthy"? Unquote. Wisdom is absolute truth and does not evolve. Yeshua's 2,000-year-old wisdom is proof of this. We continue our evolution towards it. One last saying, number 44. I contend that the Holy Spirit is a mistranslation of universal consciousness or the ground luminosity, and in Christianity actually refers to God. I quote, "Whoever blasphemes the Father will be forgiven, and whoever blasphemes the Son will be forgiven. But whoever blasphemes the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven, neither on earth nor in heaven." Unquote. This shows that the Father, Rigpa, is not the same as God, if the Holy Spirit is a reference to universal consciousness. The idea that the Son can realize the Father and is then a complete part of universal consciousness or has become universally conscious underpins Yeshua's wisdom. For information on the above translations, refer to the chapter Translations in the text. In the translation made by Stephen J. Petterson and James M. Robinson, the word God appears only twice. There is no reference to God the Father. Saying 61, I quote, Jesus said, "Two will rest on a bed, the one will die, the other will live." Salome said, "So who are you, man? You have gotten a place on my couch as a stranger and have eaten from my table." Jesus said to her, I am he who comes from the one who is always the same. I was given some of that which is my Father's. I am your disciple, she replied. Therefore I say, if someone becomes like God, he will become full of light. But if he becomes one separated from God, he will become full of darkness. Unquote. The word God is parenthesized, so it was added by the translators based on their preconceived ideas. Yeshua did not use the equivalent of this word because that's not what he was referring to. The word God does not appear in the Scholars Version translation published in the complete Gospels of the saying above. Instead, the word whole is used, which is a more accurate representation. Saying 100, I quote, "They showed Jesus a gold coin and said to him, 'Caesar's people demand taxes from us.' He said to them, 'Give Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Give God the things that are God's. And what is mine, give me.'" Unquote. As a practitioner of Buddhist Tantra, I have learnt much from my study of the Gospel of Thomas. It has provided me with insights into my spiritual practice that I haven't found anywhere else. Based on these insights, I propose the following modified trinity. Son equals Sem or self. Father equals Rigpa or individual depth consciousness or the superconscious. Holy Spirit, universal consciousness, the ground luminosity or God. The Gospel of Thomas also contains 2 references to the bridal chamber. Saying 75, I quote, "Jesus said, 'Many are standing at the door, but it is the solitary who will enter the bridal chamber.'" Saying 104, I quote, "They said to him, 'Come, let us pray today and let us fast.' Jesus said, 'What is the sin that I have committed? Or wherein have I been defeated? But when the bridegroom leaves the bridal chamber, then let them fast and pray.'" Unquote. The bridal chamber is the central theme of the Gospel of Philip. I elaborate on its meaning and significance in the chapter, The Gospel of Philip. Saying 75 can be interpreted as a reference to meditation, which is a solitary activity. Therefore, this saying tells us that meditation is the means by which the sacred male method combines with the sacred female wisdom to attain enlightenment. This is Buddhist Tantra. If you read through these sayings, some of them will impress you and stimulate your mind in various ways. If, however, you spend an entire day meditating deeply on each one, allowing your mind to thoroughly examine the many interpretations as they occur to you, they will change your mental geography in a profound, enduring way. Herein lies the true Christianity. What has come down to us in the Gospel of Thomas through the veil of 20 turbulent centuries is not the clearly laid out consistent doctrine of the enlightened Master Yeshua. It is the impressions of a child, his son Judah. But what this provides is a blueprint or map directing us to the key that will open the door to our own personal realizations of the only truth. It is up to us to fill in the gaps and create our own vision of the absolute reality that is indicated in these sayings. Once again, I refer you to the Gospel of Philip, in which a clearer, more consistent presentation of these core principles is enunciated. We must seek so that we can find. Appendix 8, the Shroud of Turin. After the crucifixion, the body of Yeshua was taken down from the cross by Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and John state that Mariamne was also present. Luke implies she was there at a distance without specifically mentioning her biblical name. Yeshua was taken to a freshly hewn tomb owned by Joseph of Arimathea, whom evidence suggests was his uncle. There his body was anointed with oils and herbs and wrapped in a cloth or shroud. According to Jewish custom at that time, the body would have been left to decompose, and a year or so later, the bones would be cleaned and placed in a limestone box called an ossuary, and then finally buried to await the day of judgment. The Shroud of Turin is a plausible relic and, in my opinion, is authentic. It has a long recorded history and has been revered by generations of people going back to the 1st century. It is logical that something as intimately connected with Yeshua's crucifixion would have been preserved by whoever was able to recover it from the empty tomb. Such a unique artifact would have been treasured and would not have been discarded. Even if they knew the living Yeshua after his so-called resurrection, it would still have been a priceless souvenir, a symbol of his suffering and ultimate triumph over Roman law. The shroud has a unique image etched into it by processes that to this day cannot be definitively explained. It also has blood stains that are consistent with somebody being severely whipped, crucified with nails through the wrists, a spear wound to the side of the body, and a crown of thorns having been placed on the victim's head. The shroud reveals, under modern analysis, that whoever was wrapped in it was still alive because the blood from the various wounds was still flowing. Corpses have no blood pressure and do not bleed. The blood flows in different directions, consistent with the living victim changing position during the process. In 1532, the shroud was damaged in a fire and the burnt parts were repaired. Various expert panels have authenticated it as the scientific era unfolded, and in 1932, Pope Pius XI stated, I quote, "We speak as a scientist, not as Pope. We have personally investigated the shroud and we are convinced of its authenticity," unquote. The fabric has been tested and it conforms to the type of yarn and weave used in 1st century Israel. Pollen samples taken from it also confirm it originated in Israel at the time of Yeshua. The image of Yeshua preserved on the shroud shows no evidence of brushstrokes or paint and is not the result of any contrived addition to the fabric. It has been burnt into it by an unknown process that modern artists find difficult to duplicate. In the 1st century, pots and pans were considered high technology, so it had to be the result of some natural process. In 1976, the Americans, with 20th century rocket science technology, got on the job. Being good Americans, they called their research STRP, or Shroud of Turin Research Project. Most of the people involved were not Christians and expected that they would prove it was a fake within a few hours. Under ultraviolet fluorescent photography and sophisticated spectral analysis, they reluctantly concluded it was authentic. According to Barry Schwartz, a Jew who confesses that he was utterly skeptical and who was the official documenting photographer on the project, I quote, "It was not an artwork, it has properties that no artwork can have." He further stated, "You can go to the data and draw your own conclusions. It's the only science published in the literature based on the direct examination of that cloth," unquote. There is red blood on the shroud that shows that the blood was not old when it was absorbed. Old blood turns brown or black within hours. This confounded the team and was something they originally considered may have been evidence that the shroud was a fake. Dr. Alan Adler, the blood chemist on the team, who wrote a whole paper on this specific subject, found a high concentration of bilirubin in the blood that he claimed pointed to hemoglobin breakdown. This has subsequently been disputed and shown to be a sign of blood under stress. Living blood, not old, dried blood from a dead body, was under stress when it was absorbed into the shroud, which can be interpreted as further evidence that Yeshua was alive. Either way, none of this evidence proves conclusively that Yeshua was dead, despite the investigators attempting to present their findings based on this incorrect assumption as one of the central premises of their work. In 1988, the Vatican allowed a small sample to be cut from the shroud for carbon-14 dating. The result was disappointing, dating it to around the time the repairs were made. The sample strip contained cotton, which was used for the repairs, and subsequent examination has verified this deceit. The Vatican, true to form, has not allowed any further scientific studies to be made. I would add that the Vatican is fully aware that it is an entirely fraudulent enterprise and doesn't want any truth to be revealed about any biblical events which may at some future time be shown to invalidate their nonsense. They do not want any real information to be added to the biblical records for any reason. It can only weaken their already shaky position. I speculate that they have ample evidence locked away in the Vatican archives that disprove everything they stand for. They have no interest in revealing any aspect of the truth. I offer as explanation for the mysterious image recorded on the fabric that Yeshua was unconscious for a prolonged period and suffered a severe fever that gently burnt his image into the cloth. We will never know what medications were given to him by Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus to ease his suffering and hasten his recovery. The Bible states that Nicodemus had 100 pounds of herbs, which is a substantial amount of medication, and perhaps some of these natural substances created a stain when combined with the feverish temperatures generated by a very sick man. Raymond Rogers, the lead chemist on the STRP team, put forward the theory that the image was created by a chemical reaction caused by amines escaping from the body under stress. There were no signs of decomposition, and he stated it was a pre-resurrection image. We do know, according to the Gospel of John, that when he emerged from the tomb after roughly 36 hours, Mariamne, who was the first to encounter him, didn't immediately recognize him. It seems reasonable to assume that he was very sick, had lost weight, and was in very bad physical condition. It would be very useful if a DNA sample could be extracted from the blood on the shroud and this be compared with the DNA samples from the Talpiot tomb. This would either conclusively authenticate all of these relics or throw doubt on the authenticity of one or both. It could either conclusively solve these ancient mysteries or open the floodgates to a tsunami of conflicting opinions and textbooks, adding even more fuel to humanity's perennial confusion regarding the Master Yeshua. The Shroud of Turin, whether authentic or not, neither proves nor disproves anything regarding the bogus, nonsensical claims of Jesus' resurrection. It is a fascinating relic that would definitely have been preserved and treasured by any of the surviving participants of the events surrounding one of history's most pivotal conundrums. Appendix 9. The Spear of Longinus. This one goes straight into the porky bin. Do not pass go, do not collect 200. The so-called Spear of Destiny was claimed to be the actual spear of Gaius Longinus, the Roman centurion who used it to pierce the side of Jesus as he was dying on the cross. It wasn't. Carbon-14 dated it to around the 12th century, or about the time when it first became prominent in the murderous hands of Charlemagne the Great. It was believed to have made not only Charlemagne, but Napoleon and Hitler invincible until it slipped out of their possession just before their downfalls. Hitler is said to have practically salivated over it when he first discovered it in a museum in Vienna. It was said to have been the inspiration behind the rise of the Third Reich, and maybe it really did play a part in the deluded mind of the Führer. Immediately after his first invasion, that of his native Austria, he eagerly took possession of the spear after looting it from the museum where it had first titillated his megalomaniac fantasies. The reasoning behind the alleged supernatural powers of this artifact is, to put it nicely, completely specious. It was indubitably a product of the superstition and ignorance of the Dark Ages, when Christianity plied its tyrannical trade unfettered across most of Europe. It was a megalomaniac placebo and only rates mention because the psychopath Hitler embraced its fraudulent powers as a talisman to compensate for his pathetically small penis. Apparently, nobody bothered to wonder why a spear that had been thrust into the guts of Yeshua to determine whether or not he was dead yet would confer such mighty power on three of modern history's most accomplished murderers. Yeshua's core message was unequivocally love and compassion. Why would any artifact so intimately connected with a pacifist healer who has even claimed to have raised the dead be associated with empowering mass slaughter? Neither Stalin, Mao Zedong, nor Pol Pot needed any ancient talismans to supercharge their campaigns of mass murder. Serious evil, or ignorance, only requires an opportunity to manifest. Metal and wood can never be any more than tools which are only capable of atrocities in the wrong hands. If the Spear of Destiny really did have any supernatural powers, surely it would have immediately plunged itself into the hearts of Charlemagne, Napoleon, and Hitler the instant it was drawn into their campaigns of psychopathic carnage. Porky bin. Appendix 10. What is Christ? The name of the Christian religion is derived from the word Christ. Christ is also the source of the word Christmas, which is the ceremony that celebrates the implausible birth of Jesus on December 25th in the year 1 AD. Jesus is referred to as Jesus Christ, or alternatively, Christ Jesus. The word is a transliteration of the Greek word Christos, which means anointed. In the Old Testament, anointing was a ceremonial reserved for the kings of Israel. In this way, it could be considered similar in meaning to one who is crowned. Unfortunately, the only reference to Jesus being crowned was with a crown of thorns at his crucifixion. This was just one of the ways the Romans heaped scorn on the man who would ultimately save the Roman Empire from total extinction. It is accurate to claim that Jesus was the saviour of the immoral Romans and kept the Roman Empire alive into the 21st century. Both the Gospels of Mark and Matthew begin by referring to Jesus Christ, and it is considered a title rather than a name. In the first century, Jews didn't have surnames, and people were differentiated by using their name, known ironically as their Christian name, and their place of origin. For this reason, Mary Magdalene is considered by mainstream religionists to have come from the town of Magdala. On his ossuary, Yeshua was identified as Yeshua bar Yehoseph, translated as Jesus, son of Joseph. Neither the word Christ nor any variation thereof is present. However, in the Gospel of Philip we find the following, I quote, "The apostles before us called him Jesus the Nazarene Messiah," that is, Jesus the Nazarene Christ. The last name is Christ, the first is Jesus, the middle one is the Nazarene. Messiah has two meanings, both Christ and the measured. Jesus in Hebrew is redemption. Nazarah is the truth. So the Nazarene is the truth. Christ is the one who was measured. The Nazarene and Jesus are the ones who were measured. Unquote. This has been thoroughly pureed in the blender of faithful translation. I have nothing. This traffic jam of divergent terminology is one of the most inexplicable parts of the Gospel of Philip. Clearly, the conceptual magnitude and spiritual depth of the cultures whose vocabularies were brought to bear on these words were unable to accurately represent the complexity of meaning they were attempting to reveal. In the esoteric Ramallah revelations, the Christ principle is defined as sacrificial service through love. This is a later interpretation and is not found in the Bible or in any of the apocryphal texts. In modern times, it is more likely that you will hear the words Jesus Christ used as a curse. If somebody hits their finger with a hammer, they are likely to exclaim, Jesus Christ! The church calls this blasphemy. Recently, so as not to blaspheme, the letter H was added, so these days people often exclaim, Jesus H. Christ, in moments of exasperation, which is deemed to not be blasphemous because it is only similar to Jesus Christ. This is just another example of how ridiculous the Christian doctrine has become in the modern era, unless, of course, you happen to be a Christian. I have not used the word Christ, but instead the title Master when referring to Yeshua. Renowned theosophist and author Alice A. Bailey describes a master in A Visual Biography of Her Life and Teachings. I quote, "A master never tells a disciple what to do or where to go or how to handle a situation, in spite of all the bunk talked by nice, well-meaning devotees. The master is a busy executive and his job is world direction. He never runs around talking sweet platitudes to perfectly mediocre people whose influence is nil and whose power to serve is undeveloped." Unquote. Appendix 11. Racism and Sexism. Amongst the many unfortunate consequences of imposing ignorance on young, impressionable minds are the dual curses of racism and sexism. The corrupted Christian doctrine contains within it many features that promulgate and encourage these two appalling forms of prejudice which thrive in the unevolved minds of ignorant people. There is overwhelming evidence in the Bible and in the apocryphal texts that Yeshua was neither racist nor sexist. The parable of the Good Samaritan is an admonition against racism. It demonstrates that character, not race nor creed, differentiates the worthy from the unworthy. Jesus was constantly assisting fallen or disadvantaged women and elevating them socially within his community. These two powerful examples stand amongst many and conclusively show that the racism and sexism found in Christianity did not come from Yeshua. One of the maxims of tyrants throughout history has been divide and conquer. These two jewels of ignorance sharpen the tyrant's spears and arrows. Racism has empowered wars, slavery, and global imperialism. Sexism has empowered domestic suppression, family violence, and the murder of female children. I am not aware of any positive consequences of either of these afflictive mindsets for either individuals or communities. The Old Testament has extra-Semitism as one of its basic premises. This is the belief that the Jews are God's chosen people, and because of this, they are somehow better or more worthy than the rest of us. It remains an accepted part of modern Judaism, and its consequences to the Palestinians have been catastrophic. The implications of this are pretty bad for Christians. It basically says that no matter how much faith you have managed to generate during your life, you aren't Jewish, so you won't be welcome on the only bus going to their heaven. Many of the early Jesus movements, including the Ebionites, the Nazarenes, and the reluctantly dragged to the party and formally renamed Judeo-Christians, didn't accept Gentiles, that is, non-Jews. That took Paul. The Gnostics were a notable exception to this early fundamental racism. Racism is generally understood to be a belief in the inferiority of other races, often easily identified by the color of their skin. Also, for any race to be considered inferior, another race or races must be considered superior. Therefore, racism also includes an implied belief in the superiority of some race or races, usually that of the racist. Any assertion of the inferiority or superiority of any race is racism. Extra-Semitism is just as racist as anti-Semitism. All races produce their fair share of exceptional people. There are a lot of cultural, geographical, and economic factors that either facilitate or hinder an individual's path to success. This doesn't mean that individuals who are disadvantaged by any of these variables are somehow superior or inferior, a principle that can be extrapolated to include entire races. We celebrate the Olympic Games every 4 years, where all of our human races compete to show mastery of running, jumping, swimming, throwing things, kicking balls, and a number of other ordinary physical abilities taken to extremes through rigorous training. No one race or colour of person has a monopoly on any event or class of event. Over the long history of the Olympic Games, the results have identified some minor aptitudes, but overall we have balanced out. We all have roughly the same physical and cognitive abilities, no matter what colour our skin is. Racism is narrow-minded fear projected by isolated, ignorant, insecure minds who require re-education and a big hug. They need to understand that they are valued members of the entire human race or family, and that our diversity is one of our greatest assets. Racism is overwhelmingly only applied to other humans. I've never heard it argued seriously that a white cow is better than a black cow, or a brown chicken is inferior to a black one, or vice versa. Tabby cats and ginger cats don't exhibit any different behavior or aptitudes due to their color. White dogs are not generally preferred to black or brown dogs. Racism based on color appears to be something we humans claim only for our own species, which one could argue is speciesist. In some cultures, black cats are considered harbingers of bad luck. This assertion has no validity according to the law of karma and must therefore be dismissed as superstition. The New Testament has been responsible for worldwide anti-Semitism since the Romans first corrupted the story of Yeshua's crucifixion to deflect culpability away from themselves and onto the Jews. In the Gospels, they went out of their way to portray Pontius Pilate as being, at worst, ambivalent in authorizing Jesus' execution. They blamed the disciple Judas for betraying Jesus with a kiss, and then the Jewish high priest Caiaphas by claiming that he insisted Jesus be crucified. Finally, they blamed the Jewish mob, who rejected Pilate's bogus offer to pardon Jesus and instead demanded he pardon the criminal Barabbas. This is all clearly nonsense. The Romans had serious political reasons to want Yeshua dead. He was being heralded as King of the Jews and was a genuine descendant of the house of David, which hit the prophecy jackpot. This made him a viable political threat to their rule, and Pilate even had a sign put up on the cross above Yeshua's head proclaiming in 3 languages that here suffered the King of the Jews. Yeshua posed no threat to the Jews, nor anybody else who wasn't a corrupt, murderous, rich person. That he was teaching a message antithetical to their centuries-old religious traditions is unlikely to have moved his Jewish brethren to seek his brutal execution. They had already refrained from stoning him to death on several occasions. Besides, the Jews were not crucifiers. This barbaric brutality was never part of their culture or traditions. It was the work of the brain-damaged Romans, and if they hadn't been there, conquering and enslaving, none of this would have happened. This deception in the heavily edited, mistranslated Gospels has echoed down through the ages and was used as a justification for Hitler's Holocaust. But not only that, Christianity also encourages racism by positing that non-Christians are not just ignorant, but are damned for eternity. The European imperialists considered themselves spiritually and racially superior to the peoples they conquered. This attitude was responsible for the eradication of entire cultures, and this list is so long and horrifying that there's no place to start and no place to end. Across Africa, Asia, Australia and the Americas, neighbours were not loved, cheeks were not turned, and others were not treated any more honestly or fairly than cattle. If any cheeks were turned, they weren't Christian, and what was done to others still echoes down to us as the inexplicable barbarity of sociopathic sadists. The Christian religion has harboured a lot of very nasty, evil, ignorant people. The Europeans failed to appreciate that it wasn't their cultural or religious superiority that allowed them to conquer and subjugate most of the rest of the planet. It was their utilization of gunpowder and horses that empowered them to plow innumerable spiritually superior civilizations into the mud of history without a backward glance. Racism has always been a feature of Christianity. The Christian Church has also suppressed women throughout its history. The Council of Laodicea in 363 to 364 formally prohibited any form of official female participation in ministry. In Canon 11, women were expressly forbidden to act as priests or presiders in the Christian Church. The Christian conception of God is rigidly male, with no goddess or female form of deity anywhere to be found. There has never been a female pope, and women are still denied consequential roles in the priesthood and church hierarchy. The church has always championed the cause of the patriarchy, demeaning and diminishing the role of women who are only considered fit for having babies and making tea. The feminist movement was a reaction to this entrenched sexism. Women have had to fight to be recognized as equal citizens with equal rights, even in modern societies. The most glaring example of the overt misogyny of the Church occurred when, in 581, Pope Gregory, based on shady assumptions about some of the women who appear briefly in the Gospels, declared that Mariamne, Yeshua's wife and the mother of his children, was a whore and a prostitute. Why he felt it necessary or even appropriate to slander the character and virtue of one of the most essential people in the New Testament is something to which even the hindsight of history cannot assign a reasonable cause. It appears to have been the result of nothing more than raw misogyny. In contrast, the Church elevated above and beyond every reasonable level of veneration Jesus' mother, Mary. They ludicrously declared her a virgin and did their utmost to deify her through the implication that, while remaining a virgin, she somehow became impregnated by God, which resulted in the Immaculate Conception of Jesus. In order to venerate a woman, they had to make her not only unnatural, but completely ridiculous, a virgin mother. Yeshua states in the Gospel of Philip, I quote, "Some said Mary became pregnant by the Holy Spirit. They are wrong and do not know what they are saying. When did a woman ever get pregnant by a woman?" Unquote. The last sentence is sarcasm. There are other examples of Yeshua illustrating his point with humor in the Gospel of Philip. I quote, "God created people that people might create God. So also in this world, people make gods and worship what they have created. It would be more fitting for gods to worship people." These are two examples of the humor that is a feature of the enlightened mind. Enlightenment is an all-encompassing, all-inclusive, buoyant state of natural bliss and compassion. It is the kingdom of heaven. Contrast this with the humorless, condescending attitude of people in the Christian hierarchy who do not preach from an enlightened perspective. Sexism and racism arise due to this condescension. The puerile overreaction to the two central women in Yeshua's life is an analogy for the failed sexualization of the priesthood. Their vows of celibacy and the almost total exclusion of women from every aspect of church life clearly warped the proclivities of the men in dresses. They denied themselves normal relationships with women, and the harmful results are still being revealed worldwide to the horror and disgust of many faithful congregations. These sexually stunted men were charged with enforcing the ludicrously lopsided moral code and providing guidance in the domestic affairs of their congregations, tasks that were clearly beyond their experiences and ability. The result was that sexism pervaded Christian societies and was regarded as normal and acceptable for centuries. Women had to fight for their right to own property, to vote, and for every other vestige of equality. To this day, women continue to have to fight for equal pay and are still fighting against Christian groups for their personal reproductive freedom. Strong, magnificent, independent, intelligent women scare the shit out of them. The Christian religion was always about inequality. It was created to preserve and expand power. Anybody that the church could marginalize was mere collateral damage, including every branch of the LGBTQ community and anybody else they could label as other, being outside the narrow range of accepted Christian orthodoxy. All this was diametrically opposed to Yeshua's message and everything his life represented. He always favored the poor over the rich, the downtrodden over the powerful. Yeshua stopped a mob of zealots from stoning a woman to death for adultery and was the champion of the common people, yet his name and reputation were abused to create a power structure for greedy, immoral tyrants. The wisdom of equality states that we all have an equal right to happiness and we all want our children to be happy. The sun shines equally on us all, and none have a greater right to its nourishing rays, nor to wisdom, nor truth. Thus, we are all equal, whether we are believers or deniers, enlightened or ignorant, saints or sinners. Pagan culture was wildly promiscuous. It was all about fertility and harvests, and knowing the right times and places to be able to work with the forces of nature. Christian culture appears to have taken the opposite approach. Renounce all personal sovereignty and make God responsible for your life and everything in it. Civility is most fundamentally represented on a sexual level. This unspoken sexual servility permeates Christian cultures. The Romans reacted to their long recorded history of overt pagan sexual indulgence by using their new Jesus religion to declare practically every sexual activity sinful. Anything other than having marital sex quietly in the dark to produce children was a sin. It was as though Christianity allowed the entire Roman culture to stagger out of an orgy, confess all the sins they'd just committed, and suddenly they were ready to go to heaven. The Romans had been exemplary pagans and had taken the pagan sexual rituals beyond the extreme. They'd upset the balance in their lives and had gone too far in one direction, so back the pendulum swung too far in the other direction. The declaration that Yeshua's loving wife and the mother of his children was a prostitute is one of history's greatest sins. But the men in dresses didn't just suppress women, they suppressed all joyful sexual expression for everyone. They weren't just anti-gay, anti-heterosexual, anti-lesbian, and anti-every type of sexual activity that wasn't in the dark for the expressed purpose of producing children. They were anti-love. The men in dresses are supposed to be celibate, but the perverse result is that all denominations of Christianity on every continent are riddled with pedophilia. The Christian church was so confident that it controlled its people, not only did it deny the ubiquitous sexual abuse of children by its clergy, but it was quite happy to put itself between a man and his wife in the marital bedroom. To this day, the Catholic Church bans all forms of contraception and opposes abortion. The men in dresses have taken it upon themselves to be the sole arbiters in the debate about whether a child should be born. They continue to try to steal the intimate decision that all 21st century women are far better qualified to make for themselves, and in the process, they have stolen many women's abilities to control their own body and life. Sex is the closest that most people will ever get to heaven in any particular incarnation. Many of life's other pleasures are the results of or steps on the path towards sexual fulfillment. This should not be swept under the carpet of any religion. The idea that sexual intercourse between your mother and father was somehow original sin, and therefore you are the product of something which God found offensive, is in itself incredibly offensive. You were the result of your parents' love. Christianity has created an obsessive morality that doesn't relate to most people's lives. They present the fantasy of a limited, puerile sexual normalcy. Anything kinky, gay sex, orgies, or anything that doesn't involve mothers and fathers in the missionary position trying to have children, and even that is a sin, is deemed totally unacceptable. You will burn in hell if you do any of these things. You might be able to get away with it once or twice because they claim their God is merciful, but thou shalt not. None of this sexual prohibition exists in anything attributable to Yeshua. The Gospel of Philip proclaims the exact opposite of this, describing the bridal chamber as the Holy of Holies. Yeshua didn't proclaim any sexist garbage about women or gays anywhere in any of the credible surviving sources. This was all just welded onto the side of the doctrine by a bunch of abnormal perverts over time as another form of crowd control. If you did have any sexual fun, you were expected to go to church immediately and confess it all to a pedophile who remained hidden from you on the other side of a screen set up exclusively for this totally unnatural purpose. Yeshua was a family man. He loved a woman in all the normal, healthy human ways. They had a family because he was her man and she was his woman. The end of the Dark Ages was characterized by the burning of witches. Women were put through a number of ignorant, bizarre rituals to determine whether or not they were witches, and if they failed these random, arbitrary certifiers of witchery, they were burnt alive in public spectacles. Some men were subjected to this barbarity, but the brutal statistics cry overwhelmingly that these victims were usually always women. But let's get back to biological sex. God and Jesus are both male. Nobody anywhere has ever dared to try to paint them as any sort of curious. They are testosterone-driven, penis-wielding males. The Holy Spirit is the only hope of anything female in the Christian Trinity, but that sexual fantasy has no doctrinal basis. The feminine principle was simply ignored. Creation, life, and the universe were all deemed uniquely men's business. This is what makes Mariamne such a crucial biblical figure. She witnessed the crucifixion and helped tend to Yeshua's body after he was taken down from the cross. She was the first to see Yeshua after his so-called resurrection from the tomb. Her testimony was critical in recognizing Jesus as the prophesied Messiah. And yet, 5 centuries later, the book of Mary Magdalene was ripped from the accepted gospel texts, and the men in dresses started calling her a prostitute. None of this is healthy, but it kept unremarkable people doing unremarkable jobs, day in, day out, living unremarkable lives, believing that in the end they would be rewarded in heaven. This very personal, unalterable belief formed the rigid spine in Christian societies. There was no Mrs. God up there in heaven, just JC and the old man with lots of asexual angels with male names. In the Christian vision of paradise, women are too busy making tea and folding the laundry to be seen or heard of. Appendix 12. Mind. A robot is a machine and a computer. Similarly, a human being is a body and a mind. We refer to my body and my mind, which leads to the question, who or what is the my that owns or possesses my body and my mind? Is it some separate entity, or does the body belong to the mind and the mind belong to the body? Western thinking would answer that they belong to the self. Eastern thinking would answer that the self is an illusion created by the awareness of body and mind. This leads to a rephrasing of the original question. What is aware of the body and mind? And is there more to this awareness than just the things that it is aware of? Mind has 3 levels. The first is individual surface consciousness, which corresponds to the self in the Western paradigm, or Sem to the Tibetans. This is where the I resides and is the level of mind that dies with the body. It is impermanent, the site of all suffering, and is 100% in and of the illusion that constitutes relative reality. The second level of mind is the subconscious, or some would argue the superconscious, which the Tibetans call Rigpa. This is the level of mind that drives the car while you are immersed in conversation with your passenger, or which folds the washing as you watch TV. The ultimate purpose of meditation is to become aware of and then master this level of mind. The third level is universal consciousness, or the consciousness of the universe of which we are all a part. This is what Christianity calls God, or what the Tibetans call the ground luminosity, or what can be interpreted as pure knowingness. The goal of Christianity, and indeed all monotheistic religions, is to be reunited with God in heaven after death. The goal of Buddhism is to merge with the ground luminosity, to escape from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. In his book, The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, Sogyal Rinpoche describes how his guru, Jangyang Khyentse, introduced him to the nature of mind. I quote, "Suddenly he sprang on me a question with no answer. 'What is mind?' and gazed intently deep into my eyes. I was taken totally by surprise. My mind shattered. No words, no names, no thought remained. No mind, in fact, at all. What happened in that astounding moment? Past thoughts had died away. The future had not yet arisen. The stream of my thoughts was cut right through. In that pure shock, a gap opened, and in that gap was laid bare a sheer, immediate awareness of the present, one that was free of any clinging. It was simple, naked, and fundamental, and yet that naked simplicity was also radiant with the warmth of an immense compassion. How many things I could say about that moment. My master apparently was asking a question, yet I knew he did not expect an answer. And before I could hunt for an answer, I knew there was none to find. I sat thunderstruck in wonder, and yet a deep, glowing certainty that I had never known before was welling up within me. My master had asked, "What is mind?" And at that moment I felt that it was almost as if everyone knew that there was no such thing as mind, and that I was the last to find out. How ridiculous it seemed then to even look for mind." Unquote. Taken out of context, this quote is a paradox. It appears to negate its own reality, which is exactly what had happened. It serves to illustrate that wisdom can only arise through experience, and unless you have had that experience, meaning remains elusive. Surface mind, or SEM, was shattered, and in the gap there arose an awareness of Rigpa. The illusion was laid bare. Sogyal Rinpoche lived in Tibet at this time, surrounded by realized spiritual masters. Almost everyone around him did know that surface mind, SEM, was an illusion. You do not have this advantage. You live in an environment where most people believe their self is real and their worldly experiences are valid. In the gap that emerged when SEM fell away, we find a description that is reminiscent of Yeshua's many descriptions in the Gospel of Thomas of the kingdom of heaven. Sogyal Rinpoche further states, I quote, "Let me introduce you now as simply as I can to an explanation of how exactly this process works. This will be invaluable later on when we come to look at what happens at the moment of death. In Dzogchen, the fundamental inherent nature of everything is called the ground luminosity, or the mother luminosity. This pervades our whole experience and is therefore the inherent nature of the thoughts and emotions that arise in our minds as well, although we do not recognize it. When the Master introduces us to the true nature of mind, to the state of Rigpa, it is as if he or she gives us a master key. In Dzogchen, we call this key, which is going to open to us the door to total knowledge, the path luminosity or child luminosity. The ground luminosity and path luminosity are fundamentally the same, of course, and it is only for the purpose of explanation and practice that they are categorized in this way. But once we have the key to the path luminosity through the introduction of the Master, we can use it at will to open the door to the innate nature of reality." Unquote. I conclude this work with this final fundamental question. What is mind?